Right. Now, risk assessment process, five-step risk assessment approach. The first step is identify the hazards. Okay, you identify the hazards by observation, by task analysis, by looking at legislation, by looking at any of your previous incidents or accidents or near misses. Then decide who might be harmed. So the person or the people who can be harmed could be contractors, could be your workers, could be member of public, could be anyone, and how they might be harmed. For example, could they fall from height? Could they slip or trip? Would there be any collision and all that? So next step is step number 3, evaluate the risk. If you can see on the top, evaluation of the risk, okay? Do we all know how to calculate the risk or evaluate the risk? Likelihood times consequences. So evaluate the risk, it's on the top, and decide on precautions. We will look at the hierarchy of control. We will look at the hierarchy of control. Okay, it is an important one. So we'll look at the hierarchy of control for deciding on precautions. Then we record our findings. Why do we record our findings? We need an audit trail, and it's also a legal requirement for an employer if they have 5 or more employees to do to record your findings of a risk assessment, and then review your findings to see if something has changed, if a personnel has changed, machine has changed, maybe a building has changed, maybe there's an incident, accident, or a dangerous occurrence. Okay, these are the 5 steps of the risk assessment. Identify the hazards, decide who might be harmed and how they might be harmed, evaluate the risk, and decide on precautions. So when you look at the evaluate the risk, then likelihood times consequences, decide on precautions, hierarchy of control, record your findings, and then review your findings. Okay. Everybody's clear on that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Now, when we say decide on precautions, we need to look at the hierarchy of control. Now, what is the hierarchy of control? It comes from ISO 45001. So we can eliminate it completely remove the hazard. First, we need to start from here. Substitute the hazard, change or reduce with the less dangerous one. Engineering controls, yeah. Then we need to have administrative controls, which are procedural controls. The last thing is personal protective equipment. So this is how we need to deal with it. Elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and the last line of defense would be personal protective equipment. Now, the best way to deal with hazards and risks is either to eliminate them, substitute them, or reduce them. That's the best way. So the first 2 are the best way to deal with the hazard. Okay. The least effective way to deal with the risks and hazards would be the use of PPE. PPE is your last line of defense. Personal protective equipment is your last line of defense. So we are not saying do not use PPE, but do not entirely rely on PPE. Now, why, if we can eliminate, we cannot eliminate because we have to look at the principle of reasonable practicability. Reasonable practicability. You need to keep an eye on the reasonable practicability. We can eliminate, but why we are not eliminating? Because it's not reasonably practicable. We can substitute. Why we are not substituting? Because it's not reasonably practicable. What's reasonably practicable is the balance between the cost, time, effort, and inconvenience against the level of risk. Okay. So now I will take you to the next step. Worked example, implementing control measures. So I've just made up something. couple of hazards to show you how you can implement control measures. Hazard is working at height. Likelihood on the scale of 1 to 5. How likely is that the fall will occur? Just an educated guesswork. Consequences on the scale of 1 to 5. How much damage will happen? Just the educated guesswork. You can either reduce the likelihood sometime or the consequences, or sometime both, and sometimes nothing. When implementing control measures, ensure you are following hierarchy of controls, which is coming from ISO 45001. Now, controls for reducing the likelihood of fall. How can you do it? And then controls for consequences if there was a fall. Scaffolding, engineering control, training, admin control, safe systems of work, admin control, harness and lanyard PPE, and on the top you can say avoid working at height if it's possible. Avoid working at height if it's possible, yeah? If it's possible that you can avoid working at height, then you should avoid it. Maybe work from ground. Okay, now that's that. And then controls for consequences if there was a fall. Airbags, engineering controls, nets, engineering controls. So you start from the top. Elimination, substitution, and then you come down the line based on the reasonable practicability. Okay, right. Now, worked example, implementing control measures. Hazard is noise. Okay, eliminate, I don't think so I can eliminate it, but sometime you may be. Substitution change, buy a new machine that will produce no or less noise. Then engineering controls, sound barriers, exclusion zones. Then administrative controls like job rotation, regular breaks, different times of working. And then the last line of defense would be earplugs and earmuffs. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. I will now take you to the risk assessment process and obviously tell you what is likelihood, how you can calculate the likelihood and the consequences. Now, what do we really mean by risk? We have covered this before, but let's look at it again. A hazard is anything with the potential to cause harm. We know what are the hazards. Now we can see a machine hazard there, a hole in the floor, which is a slip and trip hazard. And then we can also see a hot liquid. Now, for a hazard to cause harm, a hazardous event must happen. If you look in the ground, there is a hole in the floor. So if I was holding a box and then my vision was restricted, the likelihood of me falling down is quite high. I would say 5. Okay, so for a hazard to cause harm, a hazardous event must happen. Then the likelihood is the chance that the hazardous event will occur. Then the consequences or the severity is the outcome of the hazardous event. If you can see, they've got a broken leg and then damage to the property, plant and equipment. Okay. Now, what is risk assessment? Now we understand the definitions. Now, what is risk assessment? Let's have a look at the risk assessment definition. What is risk assessment, by the way? And then we will look at other things. Now, what is risk assessment? Risk assessment, it's a systematic evaluation of the likelihood and possible consequences of potential hazards which can or may occur during work activity. So if you see here, the likelihood was 2, the impact was 4, so the overall risk rating is 8. 2 times 4 is 8. So risk assessment is a systematic evaluation. Now, what is risk? Let's have a look. What is risk? We know what is risk. We have done this before. Risk is the combination of likelihood of a hazardous event occurring and the severity and the consequences of the event. To find out the risk, to evaluate the risk, or to calculate the risk, we have risk likelihood times severity, and we will find the risk. Okay, now let's have a look. How do we find the likelihood and the severity? And then I'll give you the risk assessment to have a go at a risk assessment. First of all, you need to list the work tasks, location, people, equipment, activities that they will be carrying out. Now, obviously, we have a lot of hazards here. We have a slip and trip hazard, we have chemical hazards, we have the hose pipe, quite a few hazards. But let's look at the identify the risk and decide who might be harmed and how the harm will be occurred. Let's have a look at the likelihood. So we are going to look at how likely is that something could go wrong and how serious would the outcome be. Now, looking at this ladder, and they are a window cleaner. So if they go up the ladder, just to make a point, this ladder is looking quite secured because it's tied at the top. It has safety devices fitted at the bottom. All the stiles and rungs are fine. So the likelihood of them falling down is quite low. If we move to this ladder, it's not quite safe ladder because we have some slippery surfaces at the bottom. We have this ladder not tied on the top, and a rung is broken as well. So the likelihood of falling down is medium, just to make a point. And then on this one, the likelihood of falling down is quite high because look at the the condition of the ladder. Now we're using low, medium, and high. Why? Because this is qualitative assessment. We can just replace it with the numbers to make it quantitative, right? So qualitative has been changed to quantitative. So on the x-axis, it's likelihood, and on the y-axis, it will be consequences. So if somebody falls down from the bottom part of the ladder, that will be low consequences, middle, medium consequences, high, obviously if they fall down from the top, that will be high consequences. So we can now change it to the numbers, and it's changed to quantitative one now. Now let's have a look. What do the numbers really mean? Okay. Now at the bottom, increasing likelihood. So 1 is very unlikely, 2 is unlikely, 3 is fairly likely, 4 is likely, and 5 is very likely. Now look at the numbers for consequences. 1 is insignificant, 2 is minor, 3 is moderate, 4 is major, 5 is catastrophic. It's not exactly a rocket science how to evaluate a risk. You need to use your judgment and previous experience and your qualifications and any other incidents that have happened in the past. So basically, you just make a judgment, and then it will give you a risk rating. Okay. Now, obviously, if you are in a light green zone, then it's acceptable. If you're in a yellowish zone, it's adequate. If you're in a orange zone, then you're in a tolerable position. And then if you're in a red zone, unacceptable, you need to stop activity and make immediate improvements. Yeah? Okay. Right. That was your risk assessment. Now I will give you the group exercise to perform a risk assessment. So you need to perform a risk assessment for the task of cleaning the windows of the shopping center in the image. I will send you the template, and then you have to perform the risk assessment. Thank you very much.